Welcome to the Weaver's Way. Hi friends, and welcome back to the Weaver's Way. Today, it's the last day of April 2025, and I thought I would do a quick April wrap-up for you and just show you the decks that I've been working with this month and a deck that's new to me, and just give you an overview of what my practice has been like this month. So the first deck I want to talk about, new to me, I bought it from a local contact that works at one of the local metaphysical shops, and they were selling this deck on Facebook for next to nothing. So I had to snatch it up. It's one that I've been looking at for a while, and I just hadn't pulled the trigger and bought it. This is the Shadowscapes Tarot. And it's not a new deck. It's fairly common within the tarot community, but I've really been pulled into the artwork, and there's a strong fae vibe to this deck. And so I've really been enjoying getting to know it. I've only had it about 2 weeks though, so only used it a handful of times. But the deck interview spread that I did was really interesting. And I feel like this artwork is very soft, and I don't know, it has a lot of ethereal water and air type of vibes. And so let me start flipping through for you. I have found myself really spending a lot of time with each card when I have done a reading, because the artwork pulls me in. It's unlike the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, where I know what the images are and I have a quick snap judgment about the imagery. This, I don't. It does follow a lot of traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, but the way that it's depicted and the different moving elements within it, this is a very moving deck. And I think that's why that air meets water energy really calls to me with this deck, because it's very not action oriented, but it's got this swirly, ethereal type of, like I said, very fae type of energy to it. And I do like that it's not just like fairies energy. And I don't work with the fae, but I know of a fair amount of folks that do, and especially within the Irish pagan community. And I think this is just an interesting deck for that. And so I like that they're not depicted just as the kind of like Disney version of fairies, but more as the true like fae energy, as I have heard it described. And so I've really been enjoying getting to know this deck. And I really appreciate the artwork as being something that draws you in and allows you to really contemplate the image and the meaning. Now, I have to admit, I was so excited to get this deck that I just jumped right in with the deck interview and didn't do my usual like flip through and reflect on each card and take some time to look at all of the images. So to a certain extent, even just doing this flip through with you now, I'm seeing things that I didn't see when I first brought it home and started looking through it. Very interesting. I'm looking forward to working with this deck more. Okay, so that is the Shadowscapes Tarot, and it's new to me this month, and I think I may be using it a lot more this spring and summer. Another deck that is somewhat new to me, but I've been using quite a bit in this past month, is the Tarot Landscapes deck. And I've really been enjoying this. Here, I'm kind of move that off to the side. I've really been enjoying this deck for the same reason. The landscapes feature a few animals, but no humans. And so for that reason, I feel like this deck really pulls you into the scene that you're seeing and the feelings that might come up when you place yourself in that scene in your mind. And so for that reason, I feel like this is also quite a meditative deck if you wanted to do path working or something like that. But you could also just use it for guiding meditations that you might want to do about the energy that comes forward in a reading. And so for that reason, I've really been enjoying this deck. I will mention that I bought this deck just like 4 to 8 weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when, as a result of Fairlight Tarot's recommendation. And I saw this in like a mass market favorites or gems type of video that she had done. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. And I know there have been a few decks that feature landscapes, but not quite with the same, I don't know. It's something about the art, and it seems like a very pensive deck. Even some of the more energetic cards have a stillness to them. And then the ones that don't really do a good job of like this Empress. And one thing I really think about this deck is that there's more to it illustrated in the guidebook that really walks you through these layers. And I'm thinking about this here because at first blush, you may not think that this card really brings in the Empress energy, but then you read in the book that this is actually, this doe is actually pregnant, and she's walking through this field that is lush and thick with summer fruits, and it's nearing its harvest, and it's just so abundant, and that she's enjoying all of this lush fruit throughout this forest area. So I remember reading through some of these guidebook representations, and like here, this Five of Pentacles, man, like, whew, that poor little koala, it really gives you that Five of Pence energy, but in a way that like really kind of stops you, and you're kind of forced to hone in on the image and what's happening. So I will say there are a few, like this one, where at first blush I was like, how is that the Seven of Pence energy? And so in reading the guidebook, it added additional layers that then really connected it. So I will say that there are a few that do require a little bit more reflection, or even the guidebook, but nothing to the point where I would say it detracts from the overall benefits of this deck, which is that there's a lot of layers and depth. Like, I really love this Devil card in that, especially if you were brought up in like a Judeo-Christian heritage type of religion, this will likely carry some of the same connotations that it did for me. And when I first saw this, I thought, whoo, Tarot Landscapes is bringing the heat, because this feels very much coded in like biblical fear. So I feel like it can bring up some of the things that we might be wrestling with in a way that we wouldn't get if there were people in this deck. And I will say, as a person who has many animal decks, in fact, I would say probably half my collection are animal decks, I really appreciate the thoughtful usage of the animals that are used in this deck, because I feel like it brings a lot in that you might not otherwise get. So if this were just this landscape, you might miss that there's a lamb and a wolf, and the reference that most humans have to the story and the reality, right? In a lot of landscapes where there are prey animals and there are predator animals, and this temperance between the two brings a new layer to the temperance meaning. So without belaboring specific cards, I've just really been enjoying the depth that this card, or these cards, offer, and this deck as a whole has been pretty exciting for my practice in April, adding a lot of nuances and reflections that I hadn't really had before. So working with this energy, and like I said, the kind of like quiet stillness that it brings me to, I haven't been able to be outdoors as much, and it's brought me to that same level of like connection with nature that I've been missing on days that I couldn't get outside as much. So I've really been enjoying this deck, and find that it's filled a lovely little gap in my collection that I didn't really realize existed until I got it and started working with it, and thought, this is something new and different for my collection, and I really appreciate that. So this is the Tarot Landscapes, and I've been using it as part of my daily draw collection. I tend to pick like a few decks that I know in advance are going to feel like spring or summer or whatever for my daily draws. And then I end up having a few that I just choose intuitively based on how I'm feeling, or sometimes I'll even think of a deck or even a specific card within a deck in my mind. It'll just randomly pop in there and I'll think, oh, I need to go and use that deck for my next daily draw. And for me, I read that it comes through to me as my ancestors or my guides pointing me in a specific direction. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So one of the decks I wanted to talk about is the Oak, Ash, and Thorn. This is a deck that is by the Three Trees Tarot, and it is, again, not new. And in fact, I don't think I have any decks that are new releases, so that's not what this video is about. This deck has served many a purpose in my practice. It is arguably one of my heart/soul decks that I really feel deeply connected to. How perfect that this is the card that came through. But this deck not only feels very soft and gentle, but also so nature oriented that I feel like I truly am in this environment, and the softness of it allows me to really connect with the message in a new way. And I just love the representations that Stephanie and Adam chose for this deck. And I know they've released other decks and I have them and love them too, but Oak, Ash, and Thorn holds a special place in my heart. I will say this is one of 2 indie decks that are featured in this video, and this month I was drawn to this because this image, this one and another one I'll show you if we get to it, the Hermit. I was thinking about this being a Hermit year and thinking about Beltane, which we're going to have a circle for at Jessica and the Moon. I will drop a link in there if you want to register and join us if you haven't already registered. But at Jessica and the Moon, we're having a Beltane circle. And thinking about, I'm going to be leading the discussion on tarot, and we're thinking about the Hermit energy as it takes us through the year. And I got to thinking about this card because the Hermit card for this deck has always been a favorite of mine. I really do love fireflies. This thoughtful little hedgehog on this path, and all of the images that this evokes. I even love that there's this wispy path in the back that you can see. So it's not just, this hedgehog has gone a long way into the forest, into the dark, and these little fireflies are lighting the path. It quiets my soul when I see this card. It brings me into that Hermit energy. And so I was thinking about this card. It randomly popped in my head. I wasn't even thinking about the Beltane circle at the moment, and that's how I decided I need to go get that deck. I need to see what's happening. And so I feel like, oh, here it is. I feel like this is a deck that definitely my ancestors and my spirit guides definitely bring me to this deck pretty often. And I think it's because they know that these images and the way that they're drawn soften me into the message more than other artwork sometimes does. And it gets me into my feelings as opposed to my analysis. I can be very airy and analytical, and these cards, the softness of it, pull me into my feelings about the images. But I really love this death card. I think that it offers an interesting idea because we usually associate rabbits with Empress energy and abundance and luck and all of that. So this idea that the rabbit is interacting with these Luna moths and that there's this regeneration happening, like you can see the chrysalis here as the butterfly emerges, and that the bunny is witnessing this beautiful emergence. And so that there's this idea that abundance waits and is right, the creation is right after the death. And that if we allow ourselves to really kind of fall into it, that's what the butterflies do, right? They don't know that as soon as they push out of this cocoon they've made, that they will easily find the branch, but they do it in trust. They let go so that they can emerge. And I feel like that this card really gets me in that mindset, but also really pushes me towards that feeling of it's okay to let go and trust that what you need will be there as you flow through that liminal time and space. And that and especially in this deck, I feel like the bunnies definitely represent goddess in a lot of ways in this deck. And so for me, it feels very spiritual that goddess is right there waiting in that liminality with us. So I love this deck, and I've come to it a few times this month, but it's, oh my gosh, look at that, how beautiful. That Adam's artwork is just so stunning. But I've come to this deck a few times in this past month, and every time it was right when I needed it. The images land. It's just so beautiful. I absolutely love this Hanged Man. Just, this artwork is so stunning, and I know that they've done some reprints of their decks in the last few weeks, I think. And so I can't recommend this deck enough if you're able to afford it and it's accessible to you. And you can usually find some copies that come up on secondhand Facebook groups and things every so often. But please buy an original if you can. This has been very grossly pirated, excuse me, in the fake deck space. And so I would say if you can financially afford either a secondhand deck or an original from the creators themselves, please do that, because it is well worth it, and supporting their business helps us to ensure that deck creators who put this level of heart and soul into their deck are able to keep making these beautiful things for us. And this deck definitely feels like a spiritual gift. I'm so grateful to have this tool in my toolbox, so to speak. Okay, this is the Oak, Ash, and Thorn by Three Trees Tarot, and I'm very grateful for it in my practice this month. Another deck that has comprised a large part of my daily draws this month has been the Forager's Daughter Tarot. It is also an indie deck. Also at indie deck price points. I think I paid $70, or my husband did. It, I think, was technically a gift, but this is a deck that I lusted after for a while after joining the Hugo Witches Facebook group, and the admin for the group uses this deck often for her collective readings that she offers. And I have kind of a complicated thing with cicadas. I kind of feel like they look like alien bugs, and they kind of creep me out a little bit, but I also love them. And as a person who's been raised in the Dixie South, they're kind of synonymous with our culture. Like, I associate them with summer, full stop. And I find their little molted exoskeletons all around my fence line and my garden. And so as much as they kind of creep me out, I love them, and I associate them with the beauty of summer. So after I got past that, I was able to really explore this deck a lot better, and the earthiness of it and the way that the art is drawn, including plants and animals or insects all together, has, see, that just kind of wigs me out a little bit. But overall, I would say that this deck, especially growing up in an agricultural state that is very much connected with the land, has felt very earthy and grounding to my practice this month. And I found myself with my daily draws really spending a lot of time with it and journaling for quite a long time. And I feel like this deck does such a beautiful job of making the image feel seamless, even though it's kind of like a hand-drawn collage of sorts. The images don't feel super separate, even though, let me get it real quick, even though the guidebook does a wonderful job of laying out for us. Let me not catch this on fire. Here, let me see if I can do it this way, what each of the elements within the card are meant to represent. And so this guidebook, if you're able to afford to get the set, the hardbound guidebook is a gift all of its own, to read this and to think about the different meanings and components that the creator included and what they represent. Yeah, like let's look at this for a second. I'm gonna move this candle so I don't catch anything on fire. But the 9 of Pence here, like, is a domestic cat arguably not the most contented, secure, often indulgent experience that most of us can think of? Like, most of us have heard somebody say, like, oh, if I get to choose what I come back as, if I'm reincarnated, I want to be my cat. And that's because they seem to have this very luxurious, confident, contented life. And so I love that they have included these breakdowns for us, and also like it lands so much. And obviously catnip as the plant, both for the association to the cat, but also catnip being associated, I think, a lot with like I definitely connect it to prosperity and luck. So I think that if you can't afford to get the set, the guidebook is well worth it, and it does help you understand the associations of each of the components within it, because especially if you're not familiar with that plant or animal, it adds a little extra to the meaning of the card and the interpretation that you can draw from it. So like here, for example, if you've ever been outside around a bird feeder and you see the blue jays being very territorial of the resources from the other birds and being a bit of a bully about it, usually my jays are, you know, it definitely pulls in this 4 of Pentacles, like hoarding. You know, that's definitely the shadow vibe, I think, of the 4 of Pence. And so I really love that these messages read really clearly for me. I will add, if you're interested in this deck, it is color coded to an extent, so you can kind of see how the borders here at the top have different colors, and you can use those in a reading to very quickly get a sense of like if there's a theme or a suit that's coming up more prevalent in the reading, especially a larger reading. Like if you did a Celtic cross with this, you could very quickly kind of look at the colors and say, oh, this has a lot of majors or a lot of wands or whatever it is, and very quickly get a sense of that just from a bird's eye view. So this is the Forager's Daughter. I highly recommend it. I mean, look at that gilding. Is that just not so juicy? I just absolutely love this deck, and I'm really glad that I got over my thing with the cicadas because I did not anticipate the amount of love I would have for this deck and the place it would start to hold in my collection. I would say it is inching further and further up the list of my all-time favorites, and I highly recommend it. Another deck that has been kind of like a surprise love for me is the Earth Woman Tarot, and that's partly because I follow Thorn on social, and I think maybe even Etsy. I think they have an Etsy store. And so when this deck came out, I was like, oh, I didn't even know you were making a tarot deck. How interesting. And then I heard some complaints about the images where they are faceless. And I thought, oh, I don't know. I mean, I like it as a piece of art where you're not like hyper focused in, but I do tend to hyper focus in on my tarot readings. And so I thought, I don't know how that's going to land for me. Turns out I love it. I know it bothers some people, but I'm able to imagine myself in that space, and not having their expression also kind of forces my mind and the psychology aspect of my readings to kind of say, okay, what would I be feeling? Because I can't see their expression, it begs you to put yourself in that place and connect with how you would feel, and create the expression by analyzing and thinking about and feeling into how you would feel if you were trapped by swords and blindfolded. So instead of reading her face, you imagine what you would feel like, what her face would look like if she were in that position. And the interpretation that you add to that, especially if you work with this deck often, you can notice subtle shifts in that. Like maybe sometimes she seems in anguish, maybe sometimes she seems calm, like she's thinking through how she's going to get out of this, and you can start to analyze your own reactions to the cards And the deeper of a relationship that you build with this deck, the more you can analyze yourself. And so for that reason, I find that this deck surprised me in the depth of personal reflection I was able to do in my reflection on these cards and the images, and any rigidity I had around the meanings for each of the cards. Like, here's a good example. The Strength card. What comes up for me when I look at this, especially, like, I don't necessarily think of lions as having flowers in their mane. They should. That's lovely now that I see it. But I had never thought of that. And my first reaction was like, oh, interesting. And then I thought, oh, that really fits. Lovely. That works. I totally get it. And I see the connection here. Anyway, so I really feel like some of these depictions have asked me to go in deeper and think more about even the rigidity I might hold with the images of the classic Rider-Waite-Smith, or any rigidity I feel about the meanings where she's deviated. You know, like the Six of Cups being a group as opposed to the small children, or sometimes you'll see like a single person and like a child or an animal or something that's in need or connected to this idea of like nostalgia, memories, all of that. But here we have a group of women who appear to be in sacred circle together, and the feelings that evokes, you know, especially if you've been able to experience something like that, adds a whole new layer. So I just think that the artwork does such a good job. I actually found that I liked that they were faceless. I was actually thinking about this Devil card the other day, in that, like, what does that hand mean? What does this hand that's raised here mean? And looking at it, like, is this a wave? Is this our vice, our coping mechanisms waving at us? And I kind of got into this whole tangent for myself about, like, how can we notice our triggers when they wave at us? How can we step into greater awareness of when the devil energy comes up for us by analyzing what those are? And when they wave at us, how can we make an intentional choice around, you know, waving back or not, as opposed to not? You know, have you ever been out and you saw somebody that you recognized and you debated for a second whether or not you would wave at them and engage, or if you would just pretend you didn't see them and walk away? I feel like that's what I got lost in this idea of, like, maybe you can just be more aware of when they're waving, make intentional choices to acknowledge them, or completely act like you don't know who they are and walk away. So, as you can see, this deck and some of the little nuances here have gotten me really deeply invested in thinking about these messages and the way that I am impacted by the meanings. So I think that this is a very beautiful deck. I will say, I think all of or many of the masculine cards have been reimagined as female characters, female presenting characters at least. There are a few, I think maybe the King stayed the same, but as you saw earlier, I think the Knights are reimagined as women. I think the Hermit is still depicted as male, so here's another King. Anyway, not that makes a huge difference for some folks, but if it does, if you prefer not to work with decks that have been reimagined to a mostly female deck, just being aware of that. But I really think, especially for the price point as a mass market deck, and that holds some really interesting reflections on the traditional meanings, this is a great deck, and I have loved working with it this month. So that is the Earth Woman Tarot by Tarn Ellis. There. I will say that the deck box is also quite interesting. It's one of these open from the top ones, and so I will say there have been times that I grabbed it from the top. It sits on my desk kind of like this, and I'll grab it and they go, oh, right, you're the different deck box. And I've noticed that more. The Tarot Landscapes box I don't even use anymore because it aggravates me so much. So this is empty because it's this, oh, sent Bridget flying. This deck box annoys me because it is a slide out box, and then the guidebook, which I now have in the bag, sits here, and then you have and see, it's not even, it's so hard to get out, the tuck box. So you have a tuck box and a guidebook within a slide out box, and the slide out box doesn't have finger grip cutouts either. So you have to shimmy it out and hope that that works, and you fight with it. Sometimes it does and doesn't work. And I just thought, who thought this was a good idea? Even to just not have the cutouts here, or to put the tuck box inside. I get that maybe it was meant to be more protective for the cards, but it ends up making it harder to get them out. Then I get frustrated. But I will also say the price point on that deck, I think I paid $12 for it or something. It was on sale on Amazon, so I feel like I can't be too picky about that. Okay, let's move on. Another deck that I loved working with this month was the Wandering Star Tarot by Kat Pierce. I think this is a great beginner deck, and in fact, I am teaching a Tarot 101 class locally soon, and I am going to recommend this deck for people who are put off by the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith depictions but are interested in a more modern, and this, I think all of the male representation in this deck has been switched to female. I need to flip through and confirm. But anyway, this deck has very subtle keywords written in. And I say subtle because I feel like none of them overpower the image that we're all used to or that you're experiencing in the moment. But it allows you, especially if you're used to Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, to really process what you're seeing, especially compared to the traditional images, and then move into what the keywords are. So if you're new or moving from beginner into intermediate in your tarot practice, then this is a great deck, I think, especially because it also is very affordable. I think it's less than $20 US. And I will point out, let me see if I can find the other one quickly here. Nope, it's not going to be quick. There are 2 additional cards. This is actually an 80 card deck. There are 2 additional cards, the yes and the no. So the creator is the no. Oh, here it is. And then the mother star is the yes. And so if you can remove them, of course, but if you wanted to use them, even if you were doing like a majors only, you could do a yes and a no and a few of the majors or all the majors and do a more divinatory reading. And I think it's also it's interesting to me what they chose to be part of the yes and the no. Like, to me, the no is very like tower coded, wheel of life coded, wheel of fortune coded, with a little bit of empress energy tied in here, maybe high priestess even here, with the 2 lightning bolts representing almost like the towers as the pillars, and then the plants also as pillars. So anyway, I find that this deck is very interesting. The artwork is colorful, so it's got that kind of more spring summer vibe to me. And so I've really loved working with it. And as someone who likes to have a few variations of the Rider-Waite-Smith as, pretty easy clone decks I can grab at a moment's notice, this is a great deck. The box is not a pain in my neck, so that's nice. And I like the general diversity that's depicted in this deck. I did read a couple of reviews where people found the faces kind of expressionless or blank, but I don't find that to be the case. I think the more that you look at the faces, you can see how some of the line work really does show expression, but you're not going to get it at first glance. You really have to think about it and stop and look at the face. And maybe that's because I really use a lot of facial expression in my social interactions. And, I feel like women are especially taught from a young age to pay attention to some of those subtle emotional cues from other people. And so I don't find this to be that challenging of a reader when it comes to the facial expressions. So this is the Wandering Star Tarot. It's been part of my daily draws practice, and I've really loved it. I actually highly recommend this deck. As I said, I'm going to be recommending it to the new readers that I'm working with, and I think that it's an especially beautiful deck. Why not? And especially at that price point. All right, the last deck I want to talk about quickly is the Soul Cats Tarot, and this one has served, at least for the past 2 weeks, is my Jessica and the Moon. We have a different goddess every month, starting at the full moon that we work with for that month's energy. And this month we've been working with Bastet or Bast, and a little bit of that Sekhmet energy as well. And so obviously I thought, oh, cat decks, I have a few of those. Let's look at what I have. And then immediately Soul Cats popped into my mind, because I don't have any that are specifically Egyptian cats or anything like that. That was more obvious. But this one ended up landing very, very well. And so I actually keep this one wrapped up. So let's get this out. The backs of this deck are stunning. If you have a cat, if you know a cat, this feels like a cat is literally looking out at me like, what are you doing, human? Oh, here, let me flip these over for you. So I really love the variation that the cats are depicted with here, and that they're not it's not a super cutesy cat deck. I will point out that this is illustrated by Adam Ohlers, who's the same illustrator artist, I believe, that does the Three Trees Tarot illustrations. So if you like the Three Trees Tarot decks, like Heartwood, Oak Ash and Thorn, Smoke Ash and Embers, any of those, you may really like this, especially because Lisa Robertson, who's the deck creator and author for the guidebook, is also a very well-known deck author, and this deck is really beautiful and an insightful reader. The guidebook is well written, and I feel like they really capture that kind of curious, mischievous, but also wise energy of cats. And in my work with Bast this month, so far, it's been a very clear reader. I feel like it comes through with that same like love, fertility, protection energy of Bast, as also, but bringing some of the Sekhmet. You know, there's definitely a little bit of like violence, rage, and justice coded into some of these cats, because cats do a good job of showing both their light and their dark. They, you know, I think that's maybe why dog people don't always like cats. Cats are okay with their sassiness, and that's a personal gnosis thing, admittedly. But I like that. There's a little bit of sass to these images. There's a little bit of like unapologetic self here. Like they are who they are, and they're unapologetic about it. And I feel like that, for me at least, has come through very like self-love Bast, as well as unapologetic Sekhmet. And that landed for me with our tarot spreads and our prompts for this month. And I will say, I think I mentioned earlier, if you are interested in joining our Beltane circle for Jessica and the Moon coming up this weekend, I highly, highly recommend it. I think it's going to be wonderful, and I think we always have such a good time. I don't think I'm going to collect tarot cards to talk about the different images. I want it to be more of a felt discussion that we all are participating in, as opposed to analyzing images. But I really feel like this deck brings you from kind of that darker winter and spring, like overcast energy, into more colorful art. And so there, for a moment, I did think about pulling some cards from this deck for the Beltane circle, because it just came through so perfectly. Like, ooh, Yes, that image is so just what I've been talking about, right? Like the light and the dark all in one, and thinking about these illusions that we often hold of, well, also that we separate out our light and our dark. We sometimes compartmentalize it. And so I feel really drawn into this idea that they are one and the same. They are one half of the whole of who we are. And that the idea that we are separate from our shadow is an illusion. Just a quick summary of how I'm feeling about the moon card today. But I love this deck. It's been definitely serving a special place in my heart for working with mass this month, and it's a mass market, so it's very affordable, and as far as I'm aware, still in print. All right, so those are the decks that I've been loving in the month of April, and I hope that this quick overview has been helpful and inspiring to you. I'd love to hear in the comments what decks you've been using in the month of April, and if you're going to join us for Beltane, circle at Jessica and the Moon. All right, this has been lovely. I will catch you in the next video. This is the Weaver's Way.